Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today, online or however you're watching us. My name's Tony Thompson. I'm the World Bank Country Manager for Uganda, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the launch of the World Bank's latest Uganda Economic Update. We do these updates twice a year, and so now it is time for us to give you our latest view of the Ugandan economy. We're sitting here, we're socially distanced, we're wearing masks, so it's clear that we're living in the era of COVID. It's a global crisis. It is persisting across the world, around the world, and the world is struggling to manage its devastating effects. Here in Uganda, we have more than 50,000 people who've been diagnosed as COVID positive. Tragically, we've experienced a lot of our friends and colleagues and relatives who have died, passed away. But in addition to that, we've all experienced the devastating economic consequences, huge impact on the economy, huge impact on livelihoods. Here in Uganda, we're experiencing a second wave of the pandemic. The President has just announced new measures, locking us down again. The impacts of this have been dire. They've manifested themselves in a serious slowdown in economic activity, a drop in household incomes in 2020 when firms were closed and jobs were lost, and many livelihoods have been disrupted, particularly in the urban informal sector. Following the loss of these jobs and the closure of small business, many people who had moved from rural into the urban areas have returned to agriculture and also other natural resource dependent activities to manage and survive the crisis. So this puts in focus again Uganda's natural resource endowment, and this is now coming under renewed stress. As a guest in Uganda, I've been here for almost 3 years. Ugandans are always very proud to tell me that Uganda is the pearl of Africa. And indeed, Uganda has been greatly blessed with natural endowments, rain and water and soil and forests and wildlife. But these carefully at how Uganda can enhance the use of its natural resources. This includes ways of more sustainably using its natural resources, building resilience so that when these extreme events happen, then livelihoods and lives can be protected, as well as the economy and general well-being. So as we present the economic update and we make recommendations for what the government can do to strengthen the economy and to build back better, we'll be recommending that it's not just about macroeconomic measures and stimulus packages, but it's how you address these environmental and structural issues as well, to make sure that you build back better with a more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable economy that serves all Ugandans better. My colleague Rachel Sabuti, our senior economist, to start the presentation. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Most welcome again to our 17th Uganda Economic Update. You've already heard from the country manager that it is every 6 months. This time around, we are looking at our economy, how do we move from the crisis that we are already in and move into a greener, resilient growth. And we want to show how we can do this by investing in sustainable land management and climate smart agriculture. I'll start off by highlighting what are some of the questions that are going to be answered. The very first question we want to ask ourselves is, how are the global developments impacting us? How are the global developments that we know, the pandemic and the economic developments out there impacting Uganda? What are the domestic policies doing about it? What have been done? What have been the outcomes of these interventions and the developments around us? What can we do going forward? what can we do going forward? On the global side, the picture that you see, the wave of the crisis is not very new. If you look at Uganda or any other country, the evolution of the pandemic, it is moving up and down. So it's very, very unpredictable, and no one knows exactly how this is going to evolve at the end of the day. At the same time, the global economy or the global authorities have also been finding new interventions, including a virus, that can help us manage some of this. So some of the economies and the countries are actually getting out of the problem and moving into starting to realize some growth. When I look at the outcomes of growth, for example, industrial production is starting in some countries like China. It's starting in some countries like the USA. And these are some of the things that are driving growth across the world. And much as there was a depression in 2020, we've seen that there is a recovery, and it is expected that maybe growth will be in the realms of 5% as we go into 2025. And close to us, our neighbors have also started realizing some positive developments. And these are also spilling over into Uganda. So how have these impacted the economy? We see that there are positive developments in terms of exports, trade, positive developments in terms of investments, positive developments in terms of remittances, as well as other inflows that come from across the world to interact with Uganda. But some of the areas where things are not doing so well, and the obvious one are services, and the main one being travel. That has not yet recovered. But exports, we expect maybe $6 billion by the end of this financial year. Not yet at the level of, say, before the crisis in 18-19, but at least the trends are going up. On the other hand, imports have also been increasing as the logistics constraints were also addressed after the pandemic. And we have ended up with imports growing very fast, which means our current account has also been sliding very fast. So in addition to those positive developments from the external world, what are the domestic policies doing? I will start off with the monetary policy and financial policies. You had all the interventions that have been undertaken by the central bank in particular to provide liquidity to the financial system, to provide liquidity to the firms, to provide liquidity so that the economy can stay afloat. When we look at credit to the private sector, that is the most important measure of whether my central bank is actually impacting the real sector. Credit has been improving, and but not at the rate that would want to see support growth. Interest rates also came down, but of course those are the structural impediments to private sector growth have not gone away. So credit is low. Non-performing assets are also increasing. They increased to a high of 10% just after the crisis around June, but they had come down to about 5%. But because of the liquidity support, our worry is that once this starts to get away, we'll probably see a surge in non revenues went down because of the crisis, because economic activity is slowing down. But there was no adjustment. You know, it's like being hit by a shock. You don't have money, but you still continue to spend. And then you get more pressures on spending because of the crisis, and you have to address the crisis, but you haven't adjusted. What has that done is that expenditures have increased to a record high of 25%, and the deficit is currently about almost approaching 10%, 9.9%. And how has it been funded? By increasing borrowing domestically, but also on non-concessional terms across the world. This has implications for debt, but also in terms of how do you increase the expenditures. There has been increased use of supplementary budgets, which distorts budgeting and also reduces the credibility of the budget. But the other important issue is that additional spending also went probably to emergencies for classified expenditures. So you can't really analyze what exactly that did, except that you know that security spending has been increasing and is now at a record high of 30% of the revenues that the country is getting, compared to what it was 5 years ago when it was about 15%. And in terms of the structure of debt, Uganda has to pay much faster because we are borrowing at shorter term. We are borrowing at higher interest. So in terms of the percentage of revenues, these debt and interest payments are actually now taking up a much higher percentage of close to 60% of the revenues, which is not good. But the bottom line is domestic policies seem to have worked in terms of supporting the economy, in spite of all these challenges that I've been highlighting. Because we see that investments have started picking up. Consumption, which is a very critical element of also livelihood, has also started picking up. We see a flicker of hope in these developments. And when you look at GDP growth over the last 3 quarters, it has been a consistent increase over the last 3 quarters. Before the last quarter, this particular quarter that we're dealing in, that we're living in. So we hope that growth will probably be around 3.3% by the end of this financial year. And it's expected also to recover to about 4% in the next financial year, driven by agriculture, first of all, manufacturing that has also started picking up, and the telecoms industry, which fortunately has probably picked up because it has come in to save the world. We all know how much we are using the ICT today. So the economic outlook is positive, but again there are risks. So much as we are expecting growth of about 4.7%, there are risks. The COVID crisis that we are living, when we were writing the report, we were saying, what if things go bad and you have to lock up again? Just before we launched yesterday, there has been another lockup. So how do we manage going forward? In addition, financial vulnerabilities, if we don't manage our fiscal affairs more prudently, it might end up into a more crisis at the macro level that will not benefit the country. Escalating business costs. Many businesses are suffering because of higher costs, in spite of all the challenges that are going on. Yeah. In spite of the challenges that are going on, there are also additional costs to businesses. You have to invest more for your IT. You have to invest this. You have to manage your resources better as you go. And then lastly, the issue of climate shocks. We see agriculture is very critical for this economy, but climate shocks are also increasing. So these are risks that may actually bring growth down. And this most important, talking now about people, most important is that when you look at what has happened at the personal level, we see that despite of the recovery that we're seeing, this is not yet being seen at, very much at the people level. So vulnerabilities are remaining and poverty has increased, according to Uganda Bureau of Statistics. Job losses, much as employment, people went back to work after the lockdown was lifted in June, the recovery in employment is not yet at full level. And services, urban centers, those are some of the areas where this is most important. Looking at the sectors where people are now working, we saw a shift. Pre-COVID crisis, people were mainly, the people in agriculture, the share had moved down to about 27%, but that share has now increased again to about over 50% as we talk now. People have gone back to the land. Those who lost work have gone back to agriculture, which is battered by climate change, which is battered by degradation, especially of land. Looking at incomes, these have also not yet recovered. Even if people went back to work, when you ask them, how is your income compared to 2018, 2019, the incomes have not yet recovered. And the most worrying thing is that some businesses closed and closed permanently. And some of them are still temporarily closed, hoping that they will open, but hopefully they will open again. And we don't see a much higher number of businesses that closed because of the pandemic. But the most challenging issue is that there are no social safety nets. Apart from relatives and friends, countries normally have forms of social safety nets that can help. In Uganda, this covers about 6% of the population, and that is peanuts. And yet, the efforts to strengthen some of these things seem to be lagging the increasing problem. Because the more shocked we are, the more vulnerable the population is, and the more we need systems that are going to help us to manage at the people level, apart from seeing the growth numbers that I talk about every day. Inequalities have also increased in the social services. When you look at education, it's the most obvious problem for this country. Of course, we have to look up, but when you look at what has happened, the well-off people, in terms of percentages, have probably managed to have some form of learning for their kids. Up to 66% of the households that were asked about this problem mentioned that at least my kids are learning. Look at the most poor, 20% of the population is only 20% of those kids who are getting some form of learning. So there is a challenge in that area. On the health sector, which is heavily pressured by this pandemic, there are other problems as well. Access to treatment for malaria, access to treatment for HIV, the services are going down. Availability of services is going down. And the question is then, what do we do going forward? The most immediate problem, the most immediate priority, as we're all aware, is containing the virus. We cannot talk about the economy when this virus is still with us, when the pandemic is still here. And this means allocating more resources, in spite of your fiscal challenges, sir, allocating more resources for managing this crisis. The global cooperation agenda has been very good at trying to address some of the financial constraints around this. But we have to make sure that there is money for acquisition and deployment of vaccines to a bigger proportion of the population. We have to strengthen surveillance and testing and make sure that people get access to these services. But there is also the issue of community sensitization to improve uptake of the virus.
There is so much negativity about the virus. You must be hearing this, you must be living it. So what is government doing to address the problem? Because it has served several other countries, so I'm sure it can serve Uganda as well. Then, as I said, the health sector is also a problem in terms of addressing other problems because it's facing a big challenge. So how do we support it so that it can be able to support the population? Coming back to the economic recovery, once we've addressed the immediate priority, how do we ensure an economic recovery? This will require a multi-pronged approach. For the macroeconomy, I've talked about fiscal policy and the challenges. That is the linchpin. How do we make sure that fiscal policy is working better for growth? Monetary policy and macroprudential issues will also need to stay around to support and be closely coordinated with the fiscal. But there is also need for careful thinking through how do you unwind? Because this support system is not going to be there. You can't have a firm that is, or a bank that is supported by these windows permanently. But how do you, at what time do you pull out some of these support systems so that firms can go back to working properly? If you don't do it properly, then it can cause problems. Then on the other hand, for the longer term, I've talked about social safety nets. How do we really prioritize this area of intervention for Uganda? Because it's critical for livelihoods. We can't talk about growth of 5% when people are suffering every time there is a climate shock, every time there is a landslide, and people will have to be running running every time there is a crisis, and yet we haven't set up systems to address this. How do we restore education, strengthen and restore education services when the pandemic is over? The future of Uganda is in our children. There is no way Uganda will move forward, even into middle income. You will be talking about that middle income maybe with the advent of oil, but if the population is not populated, educated, then it is nothing. Then lastly, it's about raising productivity, and especially in agriculture, because that's where most of us get our livelihood from, and the natural resource based activities, because there are so many other activities that are based on the natural resources. So how do you make sure that you arrest the degradation that is going on, that you manage the climate shocks that are going on? And at this point, I would stop this presentation here because this will be the focus of the next presentation, but we can focus on the macro issue for now. Thank you very much.
Welcome and thank you, Rachel, for this presentation. Very insightful things that we have known and not known about COVID and the economy. And want to again appreciate the World Bank. This is the 17th economic update. They always give us an update on the different aspects of the economy, what has been happening. And thank you, country manager, for hosting us in this very nice environment. This is Uganda. For those of you who are wherever you are, you can see the green. The sunshine has just left us off. This is not the environmental update, that will come later. It's part of the economy, but it is the economic update, and Rachel has taken us through very interesting things that we need to be able to address. Since I'm social distanced, I think I can get to see myself as well. I was seeing the mask and not myself, but now you can also see me there where you are. The key words in this presentation and at this very moment as we go through this discussion is resilience. Really, the economists usually come up with different words along the way. But I think the three words for us to focus on is resilience, sustainability, and inclusivity. How do you include everybody in this growth? And we have had quite a run-through thing that Rachel has taken us through. Talking about debt, talking about credit, talking about stability, talking about exports, talking about imports, quite a number of things, macroeconomic parameters. And I have a panel of 3 people here to help us dig deeper, briefly into some of these issues. We'll be asking some few questions.
The businesses that were hit the most.
A conversation about these issues. With me, Fred Muhumza is my name, just in case you are unfamiliar with this face of mine. I do work at Makerere University, the School of Economics, but also do many other things in this country. So I move around where there is a problem. I want to be with some kind of solutions. And to help me through this conversation, I have MS Josephine Mukumbi. She's the CEO ABI Development. We used to call it ABI Trust. Now, in my language and the English that I learned, certain words begin with a capital letter and then small letters. ABI begins with a small letter and goes to the capitals. I will ask her to talk more about that. It is ABI Development, Agricultural Business Initiative. And agriculture is very central to the Ugandan economy and to this conversation. Next to Josephine is Dr. Adam Mugume. He comes in from the Central Bank, the executive director there. There are other places, only one executive director. The Bank of Uganda has several of them. He will get to tell us a little bit more about what he does so that he can give us a good context in this conversation. Next to him is going to be Moses Kabwa, Director Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Finance. He's also going to go through this conversation. But before they do come on, you have had some things to say as Ugandans out there. So we're going to have a short video of what are the views of the other Ugandans, because these are not the only Ugandans. Let's watch the video. I hope it is ready to run.
The businesses that were hit the most, I think the borders, and then the boutiques, and then also the bars. I really feel bad for those girls who work in bars.
The deliveries I do with taking to my customers, I'm affected. I can't do that well because the guys of border, they catch them because of curfew.
Even the police, they expect money from those guys who work with transport. Police is the problem now, not COVID.
The president said that the border men can be having a book where to register any name, contact, but some border men are not, some are not, some are illiterate.
Since people are at home, those clients who used to come from work and pass by the pharmacy to pick what they could want, supplement, medication, since they are at home right now, they go to their nearby pharmacies. So we no longer receive those clients here.
Nali nkola mu supermarket. Kati COVID olwajja, ne batugoba, ne batukendeeza, basooka batusala misaala, oluvannyuma ne batugoba emirimu gyaffe. Kati olwamala, ne tutandika okutondawo emirimu gyaffe, tutandika okunoonya bu bizinesi obutonotono, kati ne nfuna kano akuuma, tutandika okukamula juice ow'ekikajjo.
Actually, we would request, if it's the government, if they can at least give us a chance to open the bars for the time or increase the curfew time so that at least we can make our ends meet.
I think the government should come out at least and create some simple jobs for us, for we the youth.
We have had those voices of the communities. We're going to be talking macro level issues, but eventually they end up down there. The people who take the credit are here giving us their voices. Now, there are very interesting conversations here about the bars need to be open, but then when I talk to breweries, they say the beers are going. So where is the problem here? Because it looks like the drinkers are drinking, but the bars are closed. Are we seeing COVID wipe out the entity called the bar, where people getting what they are drinking, crude or refined? We have a conversation here that will, as we say, begin at the macro level and eventually get down there. But also we expect the macro people to really speak to what exactly is happening on. And we know that Uganda, like many other economies, was also hit by the COVID. And we invoked some number of macroeconomic policies that did work well. And maybe some had different levels of performance. And I want to really begin with Dr. Adam Ogume. You are familiar with the macroeconomic policies that worked well. What could have been done differently? Because at least now you have an assessment of the policies that were put in place that spoke to these macro level figures and aggregates that possibly the common person never gets to see or know, but they are actually in their spaces. I know most people don't know the exchange rate is always on their table, affecting them, but they will say those things are for the people up there. So Dr. Adam Ogume speaks to the macro policies. What happened? What should we be doing differently?
Thank you, Dr. Muhumuza, for that question, and also Rachel for the presentation. Normally, when you go through a shock like this one, you tend to reflect backwards and say, you make a judgment that probably you never did well or should have done A, B, C, D, etc. But in our assessment, I think given the economic condition we're in, I don't think we could do any better. I mean, for example, on the fiscal side, there was no fiscal space, enough fiscal space to start, like other developed countries or even our neighboring countries. They were, they cut tax rates or they gave exemptions for a longer period of time. We never had that really, we never had that buffer. On the monetary policy side, and I think it goes back to something that we normally take for granted, what we call macroeconomic stability, where we have inflation that was low, etc., and exchange rate that was stable. It gives you a leverage to the extent to which you can react to them in terms of monetary policy or even fiscal policy. For example, because inflation was low, we were able to say, let us see whether we can give credit liquidity support. But if inflation was high and exchange rate was unstable, we wouldn't do that. So the fact that Uganda had a strong macro foundation, we're able to ease monetary policy by doing CBR. I know there are some people who say, oh, well, even Rachel, I think, mentioned it. The pass-through from CBR to lending interest rate has really been, very small. That's a fair comment. But also, that is at a macro level. But particular sectors benefited from that easing. For example, if you look at, I look at numbers every day. If I look at, say, interest rate to particular sectors like, say, manufacturing, averaged around, now it is averaging around 15% in between, between January and April. 15% is down compared to where we were around 18% for the same sector. So which automatically means that easing of monetary policy, the stability of the exchange rate, manufacturing,
the businesses that were hit the most, I think the borders.
So in that kind of whatever it is sector-wise, you see that easing of monetary policy, which we did, I think benefited particular sectors. There are some sectors, as Rachel said, like on the service sector, if you're, small borrowers, in a particular sector like a bar, if you have borrowed to do a bar, if you have borrowed to do a school, it became a problem. But some other sectors really, I don't see it really in terms of benefiting from lowering CBR or easing monetary policy and also credit support, have really benefited from those interventions. Could we have done better? Probably would have eased the more monetary policy more aggressively now that even inflation is much lower. But I think that is already water under the bridge. You can always say, okay, I wish I knew, but we have passed that stage now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Still going forward, we still have another sport in health. Economic update comes, we will be asking you what would we have done. So as we move forward, but this man directs economic affairs, Moses Kagwa, and is directing them as we move towards the intense economic update. What did we do with these policies? What could we have done differently? What are you seeing as we go forward now that the lockdown is in second day?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Muhumza, and good morning to viewers. I also want to thank Rachel for the presentation that she made. She pointed out that the COVID-19 pandemic has had very adverse effects on the economy. Because when you look at our growth trajectory before, we had actually been growing at very high rates, 6.8, and in 1920 we had expected to grow by about 6.5. So the things that we are doing, the policies, I think we are right for growth. And then comes in the COVID pandemic, there is a lockdown, and the lockdown had a lot of impact because first of all there was the disruption in logistics. We couldn't get goods that we wanted. There were no tourists, there was no travel, so tourism went down. We used to have quite a lot of tourists coming. Tourism went down. We had issues on remittances from abroad. They also went down. We found that the services sectors, as been mentioned, really was hurt. Education, entertainment, travel, all these were really hit by the pandemic. So, but we also noticed that there were some good developments that went on. Manufacturing actually did very well, and we had new things that we are producing in this country that we had not produced before. Especially sanitizers and other PPEs, which we took on. We saw that there was also increase in manufacturing, and like in cement. We had the steel subsector also doing very well during this time. So on our side, we also saw agriculture. Actually, agriculture did very well for a number of reasons. The weather was very good. And then the policies that government had put in, extension workers, better variety of seedlings, especially for coffee. As you know it now, we have seen that we have exported more coffee than before. And these ones really did help. When COVID came in, found us also with an ambitious program of making sure that we do infrastructure development. And we had borrowed, especially even from from commercial lenders. As Rachel mentioned, we borrowed from commercial lenders at that time. So, but then this was exacerbated, the COVID-19 exacerbated the situation, whereby we had less revenues. Actually, we are projecting to have a revenue loss of about 2.5 trillion, unprecedented. So we had to borrow money, first of all, to handle the crisis that was caused, the health crisis, about 6 trillion, to deal with the crisis that had been caused by the pandemic, to handle the health issues, and then the other issues that are security and others that came up. So our debt rose, and especially we thank the IMF and the World Bank coming in at this time to help us with low interest or zero interest loans. But we needed to move to bridge that gap that was caused by the revenue shortfall, and then caused by the additional expenditure pressures that we had. So that's how we moved. And but of course, going forward, we thought that we are recovering. And Rachel mentioned a figure of about 4.3% growth for 2021-2022. But we pray that the second wave, which has just come now, does not really hurt us a lot. Because if it disrupts things, already, as you know, the schools had partially opened and now they have been closed. And the education sector, in terms of teachers, they employ over 500,000 teachers. So when you look at that, and then you look at the suppliers to the schools, in terms of food and other requirements, those are going to also be hurt. The manufacturers of educational materials, the traders who are dealing with this, the people who are dealing in food. So that may dampen things a bit. But I think going forward, we are seeing some recoveries. Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Moses, giving us those insights. And I think we are really in the middle, still in the middle of it. Gone are the days when economists would do forecasting. Now you cannot forecast when you do not know what are the parameters. We are counting day 40 on the lockdown. But as we know the tendency of this pandemic, the president may come back and say, oh, we are left with 1 week, have added another 3. So you cannot forecast amidst those challenges. And it's really a dicey situation. We don't know where we are and where we are headed, but we need to know. And Josephine Mukumbia here deals with agricultural business initiative. While we talk about the World Bank coming in to shore up government, I believe you directly move toward the private sector and a number of these other interventions where monies of the World Bank may reach, but differently, not directly like they do with the government. It's also a good conversation to hear and to know that you will bring on the table what are those near-term challenges. Because they have mentioned agriculture, very central to the recovery, very central in a country without safety nets. With the people you hear who run around each other. Yesterday, as the president was speaking, I saw a message coming to me, somebody asking me, send me some money, I buy food. This is your space. What are those near-term challenges and risks that you see? You want to speak to those, but also within the context of how do we manage the growth? We're not just being talking about recovery, the growth. How can we keep growing at whichever rate we need to grow?
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhumuza. Thank you, Rachel. And it's a good opportunity to be here trying to forge a way for resilience, so to speak. In the near term, okay, going back to Rachel's presentation, indeed, the agricultural space has a lot of promise, has always had a lot of promise. It's where we are largely all employed. So in terms of a contracting economy, which has also featured, according also to her presentation, which has also showed that it recruited more, even in the contracting, it recruited more people, means there's more we can do. There is more we can focus in this space to be able to employ more. One of the ladies, I think in the video you showed, said the government should show us, you know, the youth, get us jobs. So government etuyambe is a mantra that goes along, but I think agriculture, and we choose to call it agribusiness more than agriculture at this point in time, holds a lot of promise. In the short term, or the near-term challenges we are looking at indeed are the issues of the resilience. But I would like to point to an aspect of quoting from, I think it is Sir Winston Churchill. How do we take advantage of a crisis? How do we make good a crisis? How don't we waste a good crisis, actually? So indeed, it's a crisis, a lot of uncertainty, but we can build back better, as the country manager pointed out earlier. And in this regard, I'll speak to 2 elements that I think are very important in the near term. And these are the issues that were highlighted by the McKinsey report of December 2017, looking at agriculture transformation in the African context. And there were 6 elements, but 2 of them I think are very critical today for that conversation. One of them being extension. It's as simple as extension. So building back better, how do we bring extension in a different mold? By embedding not just the climate smart agricultural practices, not just the new innovative ways, digitalizing. You know, let's not do it the same way like we've done it before. Can we deliver it in such a manner that we are actually embedding practices that are making our smallholder farmer, our agribusinesses more resilient? Can we have an opportunity to bring forth sustainable land management practices within our extension? Can we do more of it actually? You know, at the moment, indeed, there's a budget for extension. There's a bit that's being done, but it is an ongoing process that even informs quality management. So if you see Kenya or the region saying no to our maize, all of a sudden, a big crisis for people who have invested heavily in a lot of maize. But it goes right down to the farm. And practices that should have been managed there, controlled there, are missing in action. So extension is a big, broad word, but therein is also embedding social safety nets that you're talking about. And I would speak to projects or development partner projects, which are probably smaller but can be scaled up, that actually embed within the development, within the extension services, also insurance, also education and health. So that the package of extension is a lot broader at a trickle-down level. It is felt at the smallholder level. It is felt at the parish model level, I'm hoping. And out of that, we will be able to reach more masses. So that has been one of the learnings out of transformational agriculture, that countries like Ethiopia and Morocco were able to do a lot differently because they had much broader and sustained extension going. And the other one should be able to show us how we actually support not just looking at agribusiness globally, but the focus of the trickle down. And I think in one of the questions that comes through is indeed, you pointed to, we know the macroeconomic, but how is it being felt at the lower level? So how do we ensure that there is a trickle down happening at the lower level?
Thank you, Josephine. I think I want to get that conversation back to Moses. Mm. Moses does with a lot of fiscal policies that involve spending. Mm. And quite often I've just been reading government performance reports. People will say, well, we absorbed the money. So our performance was very good. Josephine seems to be raising issues here to say, well, agriculture absorbed the money, but where is the extension? And the result, we are seeing that aflatoxin still happens around that level. So what should we be doing differently on the fiscal policies to make sure your objectives as Ministry for Economic Development that you want to achieve through fiscal spending, through different agencies, are actually happening? Do you see room for adjustment of the fiscal policy management as we go forward into dealing with resilience?
Thank you. We have actually moved in some respects, but then you have to look at this whole question holistically, because these things start right from the supply of the materials. So the regulation, from there, if we don't have regulation, proper regulation, not the laws and all this, but the regulation, the enforcement of standards, then we are going to have a problem. I remember very well that EU one time banned us, and then they have been threatening to ban us because our vegetables, our fruits, and our flowers have been infested with some external substances. So, and we have said, what does it take? Really, there are some things, and I don't know how we'll do that. Because what does it take? Some actions, we said we need more inspectors at the borders. We need more inspectors at the airport. And money has been provided. Not all they want, because when you compare with the number of inspectors we have at the airport, about 12, with what Kenya has, about 50. And then the inspectors out there, then it becomes difficult. So how do we enforce that? That we tell the ministry concerned that really this is what you should do if you're really looking at extension. Then we have extension workers. We've actually been providing money to increase on extension workers. But we have also told them that they need to act smart. Some of the private sector who are using extension workers, they can use one extension worker in a district or in a region. But how do these people work? They work smart. You have an extension worker who talks over the radio to the farmers what they should be doing. And then the farmers call in and they're telling them what their problems are. Where the extension worker cannot properly explain because he sees that this problem is complicated, they have moved to that farmer and really tried and solve that problem. So that is the smart way things are working out. We have tried as government to try to resolve this issue of poor inputs by launching the e-stamp. So I hope that that instead of giving a person money, you give him a voucher to go and purchase inputs from unauthorized dealer. We hope this can help. But there is really a long way because, for example, when you look at the aflatoxins, how they come in right from when you are getting your seeds from the farm. How do you store them? How do you dry them? All these things. And if that is not proper, then that becomes a problem. So we are trying, as government, first and foremost, we are trying to see how we can partner with the private sector, the guys who have large silos, because there's a lot of capacity which is not filled. How can we partner with them and use their facilities? And then they also help us with sensitizing the farmers. Two, where that is not possible, government is thinking about putting up its own silos for the farmers. But we want farmers to cooperate, to be in agricultural enterprises, so that whatever information that government will pass on, then that's what it's going to happen. So that is the kind of change we are looking at. But I will tell you something that happened in Entebbe, which was also very surprising. When they put up this cold storage facility, where our flowers and our vegetables would go, when it was eventually completed, it was found that the containers that need to go there couldn't actually fit in. And now it has to be broken, and there's more money that is required to make sure that they adjust it to fit with what is required. So those are some of the problems that we also find. You have implemented, you have used all the money 100%, but here is a product that doesn't really fit the purpose. Thank you.
Interesting conversation that focuses on results. Now you spend the money, you build the structure, the result can't still be realized because of a mismatch of the designer of the building and the designer of the equipment to get into the building. Putting the dots together really is a climax of things. The thing that ICT does well, where you are watching us from Koloro, from wherever you are. Now we are actually using that terminology to say, why don't we put a lot of extension services this way? So that the extension service provider sits like we are sitting here in one garden and actually can be reached by so many people out there. And the policy can just connect by saying, how do we make sure data is affordable? How do we make sure the smartphones are cheap? Something that is talking about exchange rates, because they come through the exchange rate. If it is that high, maybe they will be expensive. How do we dot the policies, the fiscal, the monetary, to get down things together? Me and Adam Mugume went to our first economics class, I want to believe 30 years ago. And that economics hasn't changed. They told us if a shilling is very strong, exports don't perform well. Rachel here has just told us the exports are moving, but imports are even moving faster. Could it be an issue of monetary policy and the exchange rate? How should we structure monetary policy to support the recovery, Dr. Adam Mugume?
You know, that is another interesting scenario we're in. Looking at our history when we had shocks, we knew that exchange rate normally gives in. Remember 2011, 2012, 2015, 16, Uganda shilling was rated as the worst performing in the world during that time. So during when the COVID was starting, we thought probably would be hit by that scenario once again. So that's why even when we are doing monetary policy, we are very cautious. We are using monetary policy, providing liquidity, but mindful that any slight mishap will enter into exchange rate and then will be battered seriously. So that's how, you know, managing the economy is. You know, you give a dose and you see the reaction, basically. But eventually on the exchange rate side, as Rachel has put it well, exports, you know, are recovering. Actually, to be sincere, if you remove re-exports and gold, exports are flat. That's the truth. If you look at 12 months to April, you knock off gold because we know gold is basically, you know, value addition gold is small and the other re-exports. Because re-exports, you are getting goods on the way to DRC or South Sudan. So those are not produced within Uganda, so re-exports. So once you knock those ones out, the exports are flat. Imports are rising, even with private sector imports, excluding also gold, because we import all the gold and ship it also. Also imports are rising. Given that imports rising, exports flat, should have spilled over into the exchange rate. Now, the scenario we have had is now fiscal policy comes in to borrow. Once you comes in to borrow, the yields shoot up to 17, 16, you get offshore guys to come in. In the last 12 months, we have had almost close to $400 million coming in as part of what we call portfolio flows, because the yields were high relative to the rest of the world, attracting that. So that one has helped in terms of building, you know, what we saw in the exchange rate. Also, incidentally, workers' remittances decreased, but not to the extent we had expected. For example, between July last year, 2020, to April, we have had around around $30 million from remittances. Okay? So 900 million, and then you add on portfolio. So those are basically substantial to build up the into the exchange rate. Now, coming back to the exchange rate story, appreciation, you're absolutely right, has exports. Is not something desirable that you have the shilling that is stronger every now and then. By the way, for also to say that you have to be careful, the US dollar also has equally lost ground against the other international currencies, which also benefited in terms of the shilling strengthening. But over that all said, a strong shilling is not conducive to support exports. Imagine if you are exporting coffee, or or even beans or maize, even with the challenges they have in maize. So the equivalent you get from a stronger shilling by exporting 100 million worth of maize is less. So you want, actually, as an exporter, you want a weaker shilling. So what we have tried to do as the Bank of Uganda is to try to see, because we know that given the current, what we call exports and imports mismatch in the country, we see that probably around the corner we could have a reverse. What is normally, that's how you were expected on the currency. So what we normally do is make sure that the trend on appreciation side or stronger shilling or the other side is not so disruptive. So what we do, like in March, for example, when the COVID started, because the exchange rate again shoot, we had to sell the dollars. During this time, when the dollars are heavy in coming, we have had to buy the dollars. Okay, so actually for between July and April, Bank of Uganda, as Bank of Uganda, we have bought over $600 million from the market to stop the strong appreciation trend, because we know that that's not sustainable in the current environment we are in. So that's what we do, because when it comes to the depreciation side, when it is also aggressive, we know that we have to sell the same dollars. So that's how really we have to manage the currency. Leave around the fact that as you buy the dollars, you are holding, you earn zero. But you have to remove the shillings you have put in the process of buying the dollars. So you pump in Uganda shillings, actually it is in a crude way you are printing Uganda shillings, you buy the dollars, but you have no earnings on dollar, but the shilling you have printed and poured into the market, you have to remove it. And you're removing it by what? Telling the banks or whoever is having the shillings to bring it back and you give them an interest. And so it costs us as a central bank. Moping that, if we had bought 1 billion and we are paying 7%, it would hit our budget. Obviously, after hitting our budget, we go to Kagwa and say, you know what, we have made a loss. Please, can you give us capital? So those are the challenges we normally face in this kind of situation.
Very important, and I hope the World Bank will take this conversation back to those people in the pharmacies, in the bars, so that they can hear the challenge that is happening on the gentleman's side. And I want to really throw that challenge to Josephine as we come close to the close of this panel segment. You are in that agricultural space. What is the role of agriculture to accelerate growth, to improve livelihoods? In the midst of all this conversation, because the agriculturalists want to produce to export, the dollar and the shilling are telling them sorry. And it's not within the control, final control of Dr. Adam Mugume here. The global is happening, the local is happening. I even saw we were importing coffee from Burundi and re-exporting it. I mean, it's all that challenge. What message do you take as the CEO of the Agricultural Business Initiative?
Thank you very much. I'll pick up from what Moses said about partnerships. Indeed, I think PPPs would be very strong in here. And I would use that specific example of horticulture, aware that there can be potentially projects that, if handled well, because we need an enabling environment and we need to demonstrate it, and maybe we cannot just switch it on suddenly to attract the investors we need to attract. But existing investors or potential investors, if given, say, a collaboration, a direct collaboration with government, a role played, say, land, for instance, to ensure that we have a cold chain that can enable the movement of these horticultural goods to open up a potential export market, which is not going to be threatened by bans every 2 years, every 1 year, to ensure that if this whole investment comes through, indeed the private sector player can gain from it without switching off and on. People really invest in these horticulture, but they are always posed with this risk of bans. So if we ensure that quality management right from farm, moving all the way, say, to Entebbe, to ensure that these goods can actually reach their destination without question, without getting banned, then we'll have potential to open up new markets, which can also employ youth at the low end, because horticulture specifically for youth is very attractive. So I would think of an example like that, but it is also featuring in the focused way we have prioritized some subsectors. And I would mention coffee in here, which she also mentioned. So the deliberateness of the efforts that have been placed in coffee, in terms of the seedlings, in terms of the support, in terms of the coffee roadmap, alongside many other development partner actors, has also borne some fruit with time, but a lot can happen in that space as well, and it can trickle back well. So I think we need prioritization as a focus area. We have many we've listed in our plans as subsectors, but it calls us now to focus and then get partnerships that can ensure that we can be able to work well with government and deliver to the markets and get the employment back in the agricultural space working. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very interesting conversation here. Unfortunately for the economists, we cannot recommend to the president lockdown. We must continue managing within the very turbulent times. We're not like the health people who say close the schools. For us, we just can't take these options. We must continue meddling through the exchange rate. How does it support all these kinds of things? Ladies and gentlemen, 1 minute. What is the key message you want to leave out on the 17th economic update? The messages Rachel have said, the conversation we've had. What is your one message to the population out there? Local and global. I'll begin with Moses in just a minute.
Thank you, Fred. The message is that we are facing very unprecedented times. And both internationally, regionally, and in Uganda. And livelihoods are being affected because of this pandemic. But we are seeing some light at the end of the channel, the tunnel. The world economies are starting to open up because they have taken the vaccines seriously, and their COVID-19 infections have gone down. And then we should also follow suit. So my message to the Ugandans is, let's take the vaccination seriously. We all embrace it. Let's observe the SOPs for the COVID-19. And then we continue playing our roles within these changing circumstances. I am sure we'll slowly get out of the crisis we are in, and we'll move towards the path for economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adam Mugume. Your final word to the audience?
I think my final word is the Ugandan economy is really on a good foundation, macro-wise, in terms of macroeconomic stability. We need to build on that one, even under the circumstances we are in. But the most important thing, to implement what we put on the paper. I looked at, yesterday I was reading the famous paper which was written 30 years ago, Plan for Modernization of Agriculture. All these aspects we are talking about, extension, financial services, integrated framework, commercialization of agriculture, are in that document. So there is really nothing new we need to write about. Is just get that report, which is a government policy document, and dust it and implement. We all know agriculture is the backbone of the Ugandan economy. Even us who are in offices, back at home, you go and look after your cows, your coffee garden, or your bananas. So it still gives us the food, not necessarily the income, but at least it gives us the food. So agriculture is still the backbone, and that's those documents and do the implementation.
Thank you very much. He's mentioned the plan for modernization of agriculture being read, being implemented. The 17th economic update is also available to be read, and not just read, but implemented. We have added another book to the pile. Josephine, what is your final word to the audience?
Thank you very much. And maybe before the final word, I would urge Adam that let's also earn. You can also earn from that, not just eat, but earn from that coffee garden. I'll point to Rachel's point of this should be a multi-pronged approach. And I think in here, the discussion that didn't come through quite strongly because we concentrated on the fiscal, monetary, and maybe the agriculture was the responsibility around the expenditure as well. Because I think she highlighted an element there of a jump from 15% to the 30%. So there is a responsibility and a duty there because it has a bearing on everything that we will be doing in the efforts of finding resources for the varied spaces. So I think it has to be a multi-pronged approach, looking into and really ensuring that the varied elements in resilience in agriculture, the varied elements that we are speaking about within this paper are all put on the table and approached, wholesomely, so that we can, at the end of the tunnel, see the economic growth where we want to see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josephine. And on that note, this is a message we want to send to the president, who is finalizing his cabinet. Right now, all of government is on his desk. He can't do the multi-pronged approach. But thank God he puts in place cabinet to help him see there and see there and see there. We will take this message to the cabinet. So you have been assigned to see there, not only there, but bring the conversation on a multi-pronged approach. Without the roads, we cannot evacuate the agricultural products. And not just the roads of UNRWA, the community access roads. Without the energy, without the extension staff, without the good health, we can't lock down the economy. How do we open it up? I want to appreciate Josephine, Adam and Moses, and Rachel for the presentation as we get into the next leg of this conversation of the 17th Economic Update. The report will be available or is available out there. You're going to read it. We want it implemented. Thank you very much. Let's take a short break. Wherever you are, you can have that bathroom break. Could be a coffee break, a tea break, or just a health break. Walk around your compound, walk around that sitting room, or wherever you are. Thank you very much. We'll be right back shortly.
For the questions, because the questions coming in.
I checked and ladies and gentlemen, we want to introduce another video as we bridge the transition to the next phase. So Kunda, please give us the next video. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's really an honor to be part of this economic update launch. My presentation is going to focus on the special topic of the report, and this is on investing in climate-smart agriculture and sustainable land management for green, resilient economic growth, food security, and poverty reduction. Uganda is a country that is highly dependent on its natural resources. Agricultural land, both pasture land and croplands, forests, wetlands, water bodies, and soils. All of these resources form the foundation of economic activity that includes industry and agriculture. 80% of the country's households are dependent on natural resources for their livelihoods. As one can imagine, there are tremendous pressures on and rapid depletion of the natural resource base that is caused by different factors, both human and natural. Population growth, urbanization, conversion of land for farming, the country's topography, even the drive for industrialization for economic growth are all factors that come into play. Renewable resources are being depleted at a much faster pace than they are being renewed, whether we're talking about forests, wetlands, or even the land itself. The country is paying a high price for us. Poor management of natural resources does come at a cost. Between 1990 and 2015, forest cover loss amounted to about $1.2 billion worth of economic losses. Wetland degradation can also lead to losses of around $200 per capita for goods and services. Losses resulting from soil nutrients as a result of erosion cost the country about $625 million back in 2003. Clearly, the costs are substantive, but even more so for a low-income country. While natural resource degradation can impact poverty and people directly, agriculture sector's size and contribution to livelihoods and the economy make it a dominant pathway by which natural resource degradation can have an impact on livelihoods as well as the economy. I think it's also equally concerning that the agriculture sector does contribute to natural resource degradation. Environmental degradation can cost up to 27% of agriculture GDP in terms of losses. Soil erosion's impact on maize productivity has been estimated in some places to be as high as 190 kgs per hectare, and this has implications for food security. Uganda's total factor productivity, which is a measure of productivity that accounts for land, capital, labor, and other resources that are employed in production, has been on a consistent decline since 2005 and is the lowest in the East African region. Agriculture contributes to 80% of land degradation, mainly through soil erosion and nutrient loss. In 2019, it was estimated that the cost of soil erosion and land degradation was about 17% of the country's GDP. The negative relationship between agriculture and natural resource degradation is further aggravated by climatic risks, both at a slow onset as well as extreme events. And this also has impacts on poverty as well as the economy. Between 2016 and 2018, the rise in poverty rates in the country were primarily concentrated in subnational regions with high levels of natural resource degradation. The cost implications are huge. The cost of climate change inaction could cost the country between 2 to 4% of GDP annually in agriculture, water, energy, and infrastructure sectors. And this is the equivalent of between $7 to $11 billion annually over a 40-year period. It is also predicted that crop production for commodities like cassava, sweet potato, and potato are expected to decline by as much as 40% by 2050. Prospects for economic growth, poverty reduction, and improved livelihoods have to be anchored in ensuring that we address natural resource degradation, we build resilience through climate change, and we improve agricultural productivity in a very sustainable manner. It is clear that we cannot continue to engage in business as usual. What it will take is a fundamental shift. In other words, whatever interventions are promoted should be expected to achieve not only social and economic benefits or outcomes, but they should also achieve sustainable environment as well as natural resource management benefits and outcomes. Scaling up sustainable land management and climate-smart agriculture can help to achieve these multiple outcomes. However, adoption of sustainable land management and CSA practices has been quite low due to a number of factors. There are a number of sustainable land management and climate-smart agriculture practices that have been piloted and demonstrated, but scaling up has been limited. And these have ranged from croplands, rangelands, forests, as well as water systems. There are barriers to scaling up sustainable land management as well as climate-smart agriculture technologies. And these barriers can range from institutional, structural, social, as well as financial barriers. In terms of institutional barriers, there are gaps in institutional arrangements, capacities to actually implement these technologies or uptake of these technologies, as well as coordination challenges amongst the different entities that are mandated to facilitate the uptake of these technologies. The uncertainty around land rights and poor access to markets can often create disincentives for communities, particularly smallholder farmers, to actually adopt and sustain these climate-smart agriculture technologies as well as sustainable land management practices. Poor access to appropriate technologies and the knowledge of how to actually put these into practice is another challenge that most communities face. Social factors, behavioral characteristics, and norms are those things that prevent communities from taking that next step and changing their behaviors to adopt new technologies and wanting to stay with the old way of doing things, which may be less productive. And then there's a financial side to it. There is a high cost involved in adoption of these technologies, and the funding that goes with it is pretty low or is unavailable for communities to actually take it up. So what can be done? There is a need to increase public investments through budgetary support, as well as to provide appropriate incentives for the uptake of sustainable land management and climate-smart agricultural technologies. There is a need to increase access to data and to knowledge, as well as to deepen the stakeholder engagement for policy as well as behavioral change. And this stakeholder engagement has to be at all levels, right from the national, right down to the community level. There is a need to promote location-specific complementary technologies that focus on multiple objectives. And by doing that, the potential gains that you would get from addressing multiple objectives would be far greater than what you would gain if you were to only focus on a single one. And finally, there is a need to streamline policies and institutions for consistency, for comprehensiveness, and effectiveness across all levels of governance. These are some of the strategies and recommendations that are made in the report. I would like to thank you all for listening to the presentation. And now I'd like to hand back to the moderator, but I will remain online to answer any questions you may have, as well as provide clarifications. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Kunda, for taking us through a very interesting conversation and some key information coming through, a lot of insights that are going to inform our panel. But also we want to first listen in before I get to the people here. There are people out there and they sent us their voices. Can we run the voices of the people about this subject?
The soils are really great. They are so beautiful, and I really do appreciate my motherland because of the soils. The soils are really great. They are so beautiful, and they make our plants look amazing. Though we add in some little things like fertilizers and some composts, and that is what people can do to increase the quality of the soils that we have. The government should come out and help us sensitize the people on how to improve the soils.
I can see the soil in Uganda, it used to be good, but now it is no longer good as it was last time. We have to look for fertilizers which can add in, which can help in fixing the fertility of the soil, and we produce good quality.
The government, the only thing it can do, one of the things it can do is to add more fertilizers to the soil so that we have more plants. Because even the soil we use here right now, to get good soil, it is so hard and expensive.
Thank you very much and welcome back to the second segment. We are in the launch of the 17th Uganda Economic Update. Uganda's economy runs on very many things, but we have always said agriculture is the backbone of that economy. But we have been seeing structural transformation happening, services, and that's why you hear in those voices, the messages coming through are from business actors, they're from all sorts of different people who do different things out there. So we have another panel to take us through this conversation. We want to zoom in on a few other aspects. We're going to talk about climate. We had, it was very clear when COVID came, many people ran back into agriculture. And when people ran into agriculture, they embarked aggressively on the environment. And quite often the environment is like the orphan, nobody to protect it. People drained the swamps. People reclaimed whatever other trees they thought they were theirs, yet those trees belong to the environment. They cut them, they burned charcoal, they did all sorts of things that happened out there. So we are seeing that conversation on how has the pandemic affected the bigger part of the economy, but also the smaller parts, the real backbone of this economy. And we're going to have a conversation. With me is Helen Kasuja, the Community Integrated Development Initiative, CDI, just next, closest to me here. She'll be telling you a little bit more about what she does. And with us is Segawa Ronald Jagen, Under Secretary, the Minister of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries. We're going to have a conversation on messages of what should we do, what agricultural research is happening. How can it get down to the people? Is it getting down there? What are the new things that need to be done? And with us again is, she's always like Mama Agriculture. She's always the Mama the People. She has been there. Talk about agriculture, she was minister, she's a farmer, she's an advocacy for it, Lady Victoria Sectoreko. And Dr. Isabiri is going to be online out there. He's a professor from Busitema University. We're going to be talking about what really happens out there. I hope I will be able to get a very good conversation for you and for me as we go forward. I want to begin off with Madam Victoria Sectoreko. You have been in it for years. We saw you while we were as farmers. You were a minister. We came up and joined you up in these spaces. What role really does agriculture sector in Uganda played in supporting growth? What role has agriculture sector played in supporting the growth, the conversation we had here, and prosperity, of course, for that matter? What worked well? What did not work well? Nobody can answer that better than yourself.
Okay. I'm going to start from before I was born. During the early days of Uganda, nearly every piece of land was spoken for. You would not just meander into a piece of land and say, this is yours. If, for example, specifically if you were in Uganda, most land belonged to people, but the valleys, the hills, the rocks, all that which is special belong to the Kabaka. And most of this belong to the Kabaka through the chiefs, but in some cases through the gods. That is why you hear that both Seziwa, which is one of the few rivers which is only in Uganda, and Mayanja were born by women. And there are certain things you don't just do at those rivers. There were trees which not everybody was allowed to fell. I know among the Nchima clan, there is a forest in Ibira, that is Siro, Wachiso, called Sectoreko. And that forest, nobody other than somebody who is specifically named Sectoreko was allowed to harvest it. There were trees which were sacred. Until now, we have a sacred tree in Mbende. Growing up, I used to see these things. And at that time, we had been brainwashed and told that this is all satanic. Kumbe. That was the Ugandan way of protecting the environment. Because if everybody was to go felling trees willy-nilly, then we would have nothing. So these people had come up with a system of protecting the environment. Even if they were doing their agriculture, you had to do it within that environment. Unfortunately, fast forward, we go to church, we go to school, we go to the mosques, and we learn that all that is sacred is actually a lie. If that is one. Two, I have got a right. I can sell my land to anybody, even somebody who has no idea how they are going to protect the environment. Then three, fast forward once again, the pandemic comes. Everybody has been working, going to school day and night, burning the midnight candle in order to get out of agriculture. Unfortunately, the pandemic comes, and even those who thought they had been liberated are thrown right back there. So they really hit the ground with a vengeance. They start cutting this, tree planting that, trying this, and then you have the radios. I think now we have got about 150 of them. Switch on any radio at any one time and you hear it screaming. Don't worry about weeds. Just use this weed killer. It will kill everything. Don't worry about insects. It will kill all the insects without. And I'm like, what will happen to the answa? What will happen to the ansenene? What will happen to the bees? Now, how has agriculture contributed? In spite of all that, our mother agriculture has continued to provide. It was really very refreshing to keep reading during the pandemic, 2020, that every month, coffee alone brought in not less than $50 million every month. Given the lockup and what was going on in everybody's life, that was like a breath of fresh air. That is one. Two, one of the issues which came up during the pandemic was that there was no market for food. But that meant at least one thing, that whoever was producing this food had something to eat. One of the things we are told to do during this pandemic in order to protect ourselves against COVID is eat a balanced diet, especially fresh food. That one, agriculture has supplied from the time the pandemic, the lockdown was announced until now. And for that, I want to thank all the farmers, and I want to assure I want to assure the consumers, you want it, ask for it. Only now we may want more money.
Thank you very much. We see how agriculture has really supported the recovery, and many people will not know the role of food. We have had food to eat, and not just food to fill our stomachs. This was food that many of us believe was actually counter-COVID. Fresh foods, they have really helped us. Everybody is wondering how these Ugandans have succeeded, but also we are able to continue our exports. We've been able, very many things have been able. The food prices, we talked about inflation here, but I think the agricultural food prices have been going down, helping the central bank to realize the stability of the aspect of prices. So we have really had a role, but talking about agriculture, the Undersecretary is here. There are questions coming in from partners of yours. Martin Fowler is always a fan of agriculture. He lives and trades within agriculture. He's asking questions about and which I would also ask, rightfully. There is research. We're talking about extension staff. How is the research that is supposed to be made by extension staff to take to the farmers, speaking to these changing dynamics in the environment? She's talked about people have used weeds that have killed the good and the bad. Is research aware that there are no more worms to deal with the soil nutrients because people killed them? The trees, thank God we were scared and we left them. I wish those scares could come back. So the environment is changing. How is the research informing those changes so that agriculture can continue to propel us?
Thank you very much, and I want to build on what Mama Agriculture has already grounded. The progress and the performance of the agriculture sector, she has ably stated it and have given it a historical perspective. I want to immediately address what you have raised about research. Actually, government, through the National Agriculture Research Organization, has been progressively investing in research. And a lot of work has been done by NARO and its associated research institutions, and a lot of the technologies have been rolled out. Only that the uptake of these new technologies is limited by what I will later on say, the structure of our farmers and the capacity for the farmers to take on new initiatives. Our farmers are still conservative with the way things were done so many years ago, despite the fact that we are now competing in a modern market where now heavy research influencing market. So how is this research linked to extension? Yes, it is. When you go to NARO, and I hope NARO will get time to come and explain its work, a lot of varieties have been developed in crops, in animals, in fish. And many of the large-scale farmers now, and moderator, when you move across the country, you see progressively how the country is now attracting large-scale farmers. They are getting largely most of these varieties from Naro. The constraint, as I said, is that our small farmers still are doing their business in a small way. On the issue of extension, probably I get time to explain it. Our extension service is limited because we don't have the numbers that we require. The country is very big. We have more than 2,100 sub-counties. And even if you station one extension worker per sub-county, those are 2,000 people plus. The number is big by talking about it, but it's very thin on the ground because every sub-county on average has maybe about 3,000 households, and this one person cannot do much. Earlier on, one of the either presenters or speakers mentioned about changing the mode of extension service provision from the current establishment to doing it smart by way of using the radios, using the TVs, and using the digital platform, which is now common. So we hope that once those are combined with, of course, government continued funding of the sector, and especially the extension services, the technology that are developed by NARO and other agencies will finally go to the grassroots. But for now, most of it is with large-scale farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I want to get to my third panelist on the floor before I get to the one who is in cyberspace. I'm buying time so that the drones can locate where he is. He's not a criminal to be hunted by drones. He's a very good researcher at Busitema University, Dr. Moses Isabria. Helen Kasuja, Community Integrated Development Initiative. You're talking about land issues, you're talking about all these other conversations. Agriculture happens on the land is being attacked. How do we integrate these things positively for purposes of growth? You may want to tell the viewers in a second or two, what is it exactly that you do?
Yes, as introduced, my name is Helen Kasuja, and I am the Deputy Executive Director of CIDI. CIDI is an NGO that works with farmers across different districts in Uganda. We do a lot of policy advocacy, and we engage largely with ministries and partners that support the agriculture sector. Yes, one of the challenges or one of the opportunities that has been given to this country by COVID is lifting agriculture from where it has been. Consistently, for so many years, we have been, talking about engaging government on increasing investments in agriculture. Like Honorable has said, that we need to put the money where it makes a lot of business sense. And I think COVID has brought to the forefront the fact that it makes business sense to invest in agriculture. The presentation that was given was talking about how well agriculture did, and much of it is attributed to good weather. We want to go beyond good weather. We want to ensure that we have actions that we are intentionally taking on as a country to make sure that agriculture is sustainable and it's inclusive and it's resilient. And that would require that we invest in sustainable land use, okay? The management of the land in this country is deplorable. The loss of forest cover, the encroachment on wetlands, the issue of mindset, people, the lack of interest or lack of knowledge on the fact that we can do intensive agriculture without necessarily opening up big chunks of land, or without holding large heads of cattle. There are a lot of things that we really need to address as a country, and as civil society, we partner with government to address those things. As a country also, we have mentioned about the fact that there's investment. There's been gradual improvement, slightly, of course, below what we have targeted or aspired as a country. But we also have issues that have been highlighted by previous speakers, issues of coordination, working in silos. Before we know the agro-industrialization program taking root, then we also have the parish model now resurfacing. And then we have all these actors not understanding exactly what we are going to do. So we need to invest, like we have said, purposely and intentionally. The issue of sustainable land management cannot be taken on its own, and climate-smart agriculture practices cannot take effect if we haven't invested in the extension. The issue of the fact that we have a small number of extensionists and also growing administrative units. At one point in time, I think when we set the target that we need 5,000 extension workers, we had 111 districts. Now we have 135 plus an authority. So the administrative structures are also hampering and affecting the way agriculture is able to be resilient and support the economy as we want it to support the economy.
Thank you very much. That is, the civil society is always actively involved. Quite often, I began my journey both in government and civil society, and I was happy to see them eventually blend, that a conversation will not end until civil society has come into the picture. Now, a portion of civil society walked into the political space, and then people began to say the entire civil society, like the proverbial bathwater and the baby, should be thrown out. But thank God for people like us. They have kept that technical policy development oriented conversation ongoing. I want to reach out to Dr. Moses Isabrie, Busitema University, from where you sit out there in the university, in the academic space. You know, our topic for this particular segment is talking about investing in green and resilient agriculture to support recovery. Can you please take a moment and speak to that topic from where you sit in the academia?
Thank you. I'm involved in teaching and also involved in research that is related to land resources and with a specific focus on the assessment, the evaluation, the planning of these resources for particular uses. And the focus has been mostly on how to integrate the different components by looking at the aspects of land degradation, and land degradation, looking at it in different degrees, so that there is site-specific interventions that are observed and implemented for the different land resources, depending on the condition. Those which are severely degraded, those which are slightly degraded, those which are moderately degraded, so that each of these sustainable land management, and the list is endless, are specifically applied to a given type of land condition, so that it is not just a blanket. And this requires integrated land use planning approach that incorporates the concept of land degradation neutrality, LDN, a concept that is being promoted to achieve a neutral degradation position So I've got involved in this research and also in extension, where we have exchanged ideas with farmers to identify options of land management that are acceptable, that are beneficial, and that can result into improved yields for food security and also income. So our research, basically, we work with farmers. We are in the neighborhood of farmers in our villages. Our campuses are in the villages. And the farmers, one of their challenges is an understanding of their resources. So they don't understand their resources to a certain extent. And when you take them through all these procedures and steps, then you come up with options that are acceptable and manageable in their condition. But most of these also require a lot of support, because in most cases you'll find that you need involvement of sources of income like private sector or commercial banks to provide the credit. Because some of these technologies, they require equipment. For example, if you talk of a planting basin, that is something which may be a challenge to a farmer to make for a full acre or hectare of land. But if implements are made by the private sector, then they can come on board to support this kind of technology. And alongside that, also the private sector, the area they can get involved in so much that we've looked at is the ICT area, where ICT integrated in mobile phones, information can be translated to farmers so that they can select options on these mobile phones based on the climate in the area, based on the soils in the area, based on the temperatures in the area. So it becomes easy for them to decide and choose which practice can be used in that particular area to improve productivity. So these are the areas we are mostly looking at. Thank you.
Moses Isabire from Busitema University. We are talking really about, we know at least some aspects of climate smart agriculture. What do we need to adopt? And without going to a person who was at the ministerial level, let me begin with an undersecretary in the ministry, the people who make it happen. We still have all these challenges of adopting climate smart agricultural technologies. This is really copy and paste. We seem to have failed to copy, leave alone to paste. Is it a budget priority issue? What exactly is it? From where you sit as an undersecretary, you really know it all.
Thank you very much, moderator. And I want to thank Professor Isabire Moses for those very good points. I already said that these new technologies have to be promoted. They have to be promoted in a way that the communities appreciate them. Not only appreciating them, but they also understand the benefit that come with them. Our people are really stuck in the traditional belief to the extent that everything that comes, even when it's going to help them, you need to do a lot of teaching, a lot of explanation. Nothing can happen by accident. So whereas government and our different partners, including the field where my sister here comes from, this civil society organization, have actually done a lot, but still the people have not accepted most of these modern technologies that would ideally help to resolve many of these environmental issues if they are adopted. For example, if the population accepts to take on modern varieties that give better yield, then they would be able to get more from smaller pieces of land, and therefore they would not be motivated to go the extent they are going to destroy the environment in the need to get what is enough for them either to eat or to sell. So the issue of accepting the science, the new varieties, the seeds that are developed by our scientists that are aimed at giving the farmers the same from little land. The need to agree and take on soil improvement technologies in a way of increasing productivity and the life of the soil, so that the same soils can give them more. You find that we still have communities which don't need to do this. You tell them, please, the soil has lost its nutrients. When you plant, you cannot get more. Apply this. Even when it is organic, they will just become adamant. So we need to mobilize everybody. And I believe that if all of us, the leaders, the political leaders, the civil society organization, the business community, us, the government, if we work together and educated our people, they would be able to know the danger they are posing by destroying the environment where they live.
Thank you very much, and I'm going now to chip it higher to those who sat in the offices of those you support. And as we said, it always happens. Cabinet is being drafted, but there are definitely those who are going to be former cabinet ministers. You are. And I hope you are ready to receive them and mentor them into doing what you have continued to do over the years, supporting the economy. I have a question here that what strategy should really be adopted by government to make agriculture greener, more resilient to climate change and other shocks? We used to think climate change was the shock we are dealing with until COVID popped up. And we have continuously been told this is not the last. There are going to be other shocks. Mountain Nyiragongo out there has also been shocking some people around. From where you sit these days, based on your experience, and thank you for starting from before you were born. That is a very rich experience. Speak to this subject, Madam Victoria Sectorico.
What I think should be done is really obvious. Because now our UBOS, Uganda Bureau of Statistics, is always counting this and counting the other and telling us who is where, who is doing what with what. Therefore, we know out of all the 42 million people who are either depending or using or managing or mismanaging the environment. The majority of our people, more than, because for me anything that is above 65, between 65 and 85% of Ugandans derive their livelihood from natural resources. Currently, yesterday, the schools were closed after being open for less than a year, after being closed for more than a year. What can be done? This is my suggestion. Maybe it is time for us to come up with an emergency syllabus which is relevant to what is going on. Because what is the use? Before I say what is the use, I'll tell you what happened in Karamoja. Some time back, after UPE started, the Karamojong went to school for a short time, and then many children dropped out of school. So a committee was shown to go to Karamoja and find out why these children are not going to school. Now, what they talked to the elders. The elders asked them, what are these children going to learn there? We shall take our children there if you allow us to sit in those classes and really listen to what you are teaching. We find out if it is relevant, then we shall leave the children there. For some reason, I don't think it happened, but I was really touched. And I wish the whole of Uganda could ask that question. Like now, We are dashing with the children, take them here, take them there. What are they learning there? If the majority of Ugandans depend on the environment, how much of what they are learning is relevant to the environment? Because we have left, we the elite, have left the management of the environment on which we all belong to people who failed every class. You know, you remember that person who always came last, who never made it anywhere, is down managing your environment. Then you sit in Kampala and start wondering, why are they cutting trees? They don't know any better. So if we could have another look at our syllabus immediately, forget what we were taught, forget what we thought was important, forget how well you speak English, because the environment does not speak English. Somehow let us teach everybody now, starting from nursery school up to those people who are about to retire and go and attack the environment, how to manage how to do agriculture, how to do agribusiness, but doing it in a smart way. When we talk about climate smart, you know, we are speaking a language they don't understand. Like yesterday, day before yesterday, when the president was talking to us about COVID, most people didn't understand. And my visitor, who comes from Eastern Uganda, asked, is that also a Ugandan language? I'm like, no. So why can't he speak a language we understand? Of course, I couldn't answer for the president. But we who are talking about climate smart, we should speak a language people understand. When you say, for example, yeah, extension could be done by radio, then people can call in and ask questions. Excuse me. There are things which you can do virtually, like now I'm talking to you virtually, but you can't suckle virtually. Extension is more like suckling a baby. We need to be nurtured from beginning to end. At first I told you about how those rivers, River Seziwa, River Mayanja, were revered, how some trees were revered. This is something you learn from the time you start walking. Don't go near that tree. Don't touch that tree. So you grow up with it, it becomes part of your culture. So is there a way we can go back, do a new syllabus if need be for Uganda, so that the majority of the people who are managing the environment understand the importance, but even the policy makers, the technocrats understand, appreciate, and appropriate the right amounts in the budget in order for us to prioritize natural resources, management of natural resources for sustainability.
Thank you very much. Now I understand you've lived on the ground, and I'm going to get to Helen here lives with the grassroots. You've talked about budget priorities. And my friend Julius Mukunda out there with the CSBAG, Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, is talking about where are the budget priorities. When I worked with government recently closely, we said let's have a parish model. And people said, what is that? Why don't you pilot it? We said, the word is parish. Parishes were there before all of us were born. So what are we going to pilot? The parish is about the schools, primary schools. You have already said there must be a primary school in every parish. What are the children learning? Do we need to pilot this? You people are talking the language that has always been there. But the budgets are speaking elsewhere. The people managing the budget don't seem to be really picking the grassroots issues. And I want to appreciate our host here. I think I've only seen 5% of this compound paved. But there are neighbors in this compound, in this neighborhood here, who pave everything. Underneath, as I said, are worms. When you pave, they have no water reaching them, they have no air reaching them, nitrogen fixing dies off. Helen, where you sit, you're with the communities. How should we really structure the system? And thank you, Sego, you really talked about the missing extension staff. But when we brought the parish model, we also found the missing parish chiefs. Now the parish chief is the government manager at that level. 5,000 parishes in this country have no parish chiefs. They have no managers. We've left the people who are managing the environment without any government manager. And we are really dishing out money of government. I'm not surprised the economic update is talking about vulnerabilities that remain with us. How should we talk to the communities? How should we blend with the communities? You are the civil society. You know better how you get down there. Alternative basic education for Karamoja. They didn't build hardcore classrooms. They said these people follow the water. Let the classrooms follow the families as the families follow What should we do differently? Helen.
Well, I want to believe that farmers and smallholder farmers, or farmers by large, are rational in nature. Okay? If it makes business sense for them, they'll take it up. So the idea that we sit in Kampala as part of civil society, you've talked about Julius, we do these analyses, but we don't have the smallholder farmer or the farmers by and large as part of this conversation is failing ourselves. That's why we have these beautiful plans, and then when we come to implementing them, we kind of realize that, you know what, the schools can't host the learners as we expected. So we have to go back and have that community participation. Talk about watershed management. Talk about anything that we want to do in terms of greening agriculture. We must make sure that the farmer is at the center of the conversation. From the planning, we must make sure. We must empower the local governments so that the local governments are part of the planning process in the sense, in the actual sense, and money is put down there to the local government so that they can make sure that they can involve the smallholder farmer or the farmers by and large. Then we also have to make sure that we understand the context. Honorable Victoria has talked about what happened. There is a context in everything, so we must understand the context. We can't presume that the commodity that we are going to say is going to zone B will work in zone B without necessarily understanding the context. So the conversation has to go down to the smallholder, to the farmer, to the parish level, to the community level, so that we can have that participation from right there. So that they are part of the needs assessment, they are part of the information sharing, even dissemination. When we talk about uptake in technology, okay, are the technologies that we are developing relevant to the farmers? Why is it that these farmers are not uptaking the technologies? It could be that they don't know, and we just need to, you know, to work around their mindset. But it could also be that they find that these technologies are not meeting their needs as they know them, because people have all sorts of things. They have cultural context. They have all sorts of things that you really must unlock to be able to make sure that they uptake these technologies that we are promoting.
Very interesting conversations. In my life, I've worked and lived among very many people, and I remember a conversation of walking tractors came up some time back. I think we bought them. Well, in my usual way of living on the ground, I said, hey, why are you talking about walking tractors of Asians? We already had walking tractors, and we call them oxen and ox plows. Talking about it context. They eat the grass, they drink the water, they plow the land. They have no requirement for oil and fuel and repairs apart from a veterinary extension staff who is around. What is more appropriate here? Now, here a lot of conversation among Sengawa's colleagues of mechanization. Is that really Uganda's problem when most land holdings are 4-acre models, no acre at all, leasing land? What is up the issues of policy? I want to get to Moses Isabiri out there. I hope you're still with me in cyberspace from Sitema University. You are in the academia, and so I want to believe you look at these things from an inquisitive mind and academic mind. What do you want to speak about the relevance of policy in these matters of trying to revive the economy, sustain agriculture in a changing, really, environment? Not just climate is changing, the diseases are also changing. The president talked about the pathogen economy. How do we harvest the benefits of the viruses before they wipe us out? Where you sit in the academia, what is it that the policy must be addressing?
Thank you so much. Policy is very, very important. And apparently, when we look through the list of policies that we have, we can say they are exhaustive. You can say we have everything on paper, but the challenge that we have with our policies is that CSA and SLM has it's a kind of cross-cutting, has different stakeholders, different institutions that are involved. So you find some policies are in agriculture, they are catered for in agriculture. Other policies are catered for in climate change department in the Ministry of Environment. Other policies are catered for in other relevant ministries. So you find that we have policies that are addressing the same issue on climate change, but they are accommodated and catered for in different institutions and ministries. And because of that, then we have situations where we've had orphaned responsibilities. For example, if it comes to soils, then somebody in the Ministry of Environment will say, okay, I'm responsible for it. In the Ministry of Agriculture, they will say, I'm responsible for it. But when it comes to the development of these soils, in terms of research and capacity and making sure that the soils are supported, you find that there are no resources that are committed to this sector. Why? Because much as every policy, every ministry, every institution will indicate that they have something to do with the soils, but at the end of the day, the soils are left in the air. So you find very inadequate financial support. If you went to institutions that are mandated to do soils like Kawanda, you find that they have very inadequate financial support. But at the same time, you cannot encourage the Ministry of Environment to support financially, because much as they recognize soils as important, they also don't have a budget that directly supports this sector. So we have policies, but the challenge is they are spread across different platforms, different institutions, and integrating them has become a problem. And as such, there are many challenges that are coming because of that. There are initiatives that have been put in place, interministerial initiatives and other platforms that are there to try and help to sort out that. But even then, the challenge still remains. So these policies, I think they need to be revised and integrated so that the institutions can work together and be able to attend to these natural resources in a sustainable way, so that we don't have natural resources that are orphaned, nobody attending to them, and at the end of the day, the focus is only on the crops and the varieties and forgetting the soils. That is the main challenge we have. So as far as the policies are concerned, I think we need to integrate these policies to create a platform that can closely ensure that activities are implemented in a way that does not leave behind any resource like soils, for example. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Isabire out there. I think as we come up to the wrap-up of this segment of the conversation, really it ties in with the question coming in from Kwasiwe, and I think where Dr. Isabire has ended and emphasized the issue of integration, the issue of coordination. How do we coordinate this? Because the farmer, you don't tell the farmer, that was the Ministry of Trade. That was the Uganda National Bureau of Standards. That was, you see, health that failed to, they don't know that. They consume it as a cocktail. So they send their child to school, that same road will take them to a health facility. That same road will take them to their inputs, and they want to sell their cow through that same road. If that road is not working, don't tell them there was an extension staff, me, I did my part. We did the financing, the credit went low, it was cheap, they have lost it. So how do we tie all this together? And one of the things we did was decentralization. To take the services nearer to the people, to address that contextual issue. People are raising issues that we have undermined the decentralization. We have undermined the coordination of government. As we wind up, can we speak to that, tying it up together? And I think I'm going to start with Honorable Victoria Sexualeko. You sat in cabinet, you still sit at that high level, you're still the mother in the land, you've seen the 50s. You possibly are one of the few people who saw the independence coming. How have we not tied up the different decades to get up a century? And going into the 21st century, where we already are, how do we tie up policy coordination issues? And I will just, as you come in, raise the issue of some of the people that are facing the challenges. I want to appreciate the water sector. They now talk of a catchment area. So they are tracking water that is from Kawempe. It does not come to Lake Victoria. It actually flows north. But while they are planning that way catchment area, they meet districts, 17 of them across one river. One has an environmental officer, another one does not have. One has a district officer, and you're supposed to work with that environment. This is the dilemma, Honorable Secretary. Do you see what I see? What do you have to tell us?
I see what you see. But even before I see it, the Ugandans have already seen it. You know, it took me a bit of time to understand what Ugandans mean when they say government etuyambe. When they say they are not asking for handouts. In their own language, different languages they speak, they are saying, government, do your job. Because if we talk about parishes which have no parish chiefs, we talk about districts which have no environment officers, doesn't the government know? After all, they put them there. So in my view, the first and most important thing is that government should do its job. Those of us who are utilizing the natural resources, the water, the land, and so on and so forth, are private sector. We in private sector are ready to abide by the rules. But in some cases, the rules are not even there. Or if they are there and you try to enforce them, somebody higher will come and change them. When, for example, you decide and say, it is not really worth the trouble draining these swamps so that we grow rice. It would be either cheaper to import the rice or promote upland rice where you don't need the swamp rather than drain the swamp. And that is what the environment officer has suggested. But then before the environment officer even sits down, his boss arrives and says, no, these are my people. Just leave them alone. We shall see how we manage. What? So let us have a benchmark where we start from. Let everybody speak the same language. Let us all have one order. If it is a swamp, it is a swamp. It is a mountain, it is a mountain. Leave it. We don't care who you are. In fact, that in itself speaks to the current problem we are having, which is the foot and mouth disease. Because apparently whenever quarantine is imposed on a district, there are some people who are exempted. First of all, it is not the people suffering from foot and mouth disease. Why do you exempt their cattle? Because cattle have already caught the disease. Or the easiest way for us to contain foot and mouth disease is cordon and vaccinate. But now, while we are busy cordoning, the poor veterinary district officer is cordoning and vaccinating, this big guy comes and starts bringing cattle or taking out cattle or holding a big wedding and bringing in everybody with the disease. So let government do its job. Let them put the policy, let them enforce that policy. Secondly, but most importantly, let Uganda have another look at our education. I have said this, I'll say it again. My niece from Bujiri does not have to know the source of the Nile, but she needs to know why those trees are there, why she should plant like this. My uncle from Kabale should know why those terraces were there in the first place. For me, if we have got very little time for these children to go to school because of COVID, let us immediately change our syllabus and make it relevant so that at least we can survive to educate our grandchildren. I thank you.
Thank you very much. That's quite a timely intervention. You know, sometimes we educate people for offices and we forget offices are not the four-walled rooms. Some people's offices are the gardens, those roads. So why do I have to know? Fine, if I know the source of the Nile, but why do I need to know who discovered that source? All I want to know is the water flowing here must continue to be clean, must continue to flow, sustainability, but to serve a government, and I like the way you have really interpreted it. People are not asking for handouts. They are saying, government, can you do your part? I'm seeing people here cutting trees. I cannot stop them, but you can. You, Mr. Government, Mr. Sengam, you are the government person I am seeing here, directly involved in agriculture. How do we help the people now that their cry has come to us? We make the policies, enforcement, implementation was even a last word we picked from the previous panel. What are the challenges of enforcement, policies aside, to make sure the people see government and feel it positively?
Thank you very much. I'm coming to that specific issue I've raised, but I want to add on what my sister said and my mother here. School curriculum, what do people study? I had an experience about a month ago when a lady was sent to me by some reverend father for a job in the ministry. And I asked her what did she study. She did agriculture. She finished about 5 years ago. So I asked her, what job do you need? Then she said, any job. I said, it cannot be any job. You did agriculture. Yeah, if you can help me to get somebody who has a farm, I can work, manage the farm. I said, okay. But for the last 5 years, you who did agriculture, what have you done? Do you have parents? Yes. Do they have land? Yes. So what value are you going to add on somebody's farm? You did agriculture, but you are jobless. You did agriculture, you don't even have food. You who has a degree in agriculture. So after some time, it took about 1 hour, we agreed with her that she should stop looking for a job. She should go back, ask her parents to support her, to go to the land and start implementing what she studied. I also told her that if I got you a job, you are going to be paid 600,000, you, a degree holder. Is that the money you are looking for? Is it why you went to school? She said no. Fortunately, she went back, and I'm happy. She sent me a message that she has finally agreed with her parents to go back to Hoima, where they have land, and she's going to start. Why I'm laboring to say this is that everybody who listens to us, we must help these people who have gone to school to understand that they need to go to school to get a job from somebody else to pay them. They went to get knowledge, to get skills, to apply those skills, to improve the country and to improve themselves. The other one I wanted to mention is what Professor Moses talked about, disjointed government and disjointed effort. I think that one has been addressed by the NDP3 with the program-based approach now. All sectors, agriculture cannot work alone, it has to work with water. You cannot do anything in agriculture without water. But also there are other sectors that are very critical to our work. For example, there's no purpose for you to produce when you have no roads to take the produce to the market. There's no purpose for you to build a store, a maize mill, a coffee mill when you don't have electricity. So you need electricity to support you. So government has already seen this problem, and this problem has been adequately fixed. We only pray that the implementation hits to the nail. The last issue I want to talk about is about mechanization. I think we need to get efforts to explain that mechanization does not mean a tractor. For now, when you talk about mechanization, people say, oh, tractors, we don't need tractors, small land. Yes, because we have progressively equated mechanization to a tractor. But I think Mechanization, and now I think I'm going to request my colleagues to keep explaining. Mechanization is bigger than that. It simply means improving the way you do your work. If you have 1 acre, can you get anything to help you to do that acre better than your hands? If you can get anything to help you to weed without necessarily getting the hoe, that's mechanization. Even somebody with the half an acre, you can mechanize. But because we have equated it to a tractor, we have lost the point, and everybody is now asking for a tractor. You have a mechanization program. Where is the tractor? Give me a tractor. Okay. But you are in Chigezi. These hills, the tractor, how are you going to? So this issue of mechanization, we are now, I've picked it. We are going now to try to explain what it means. And therefore, the issue of policies, I think I've explained. The policies are there, but the policies have to be implemented, not mechanically. If people have been in a wetland for last 50 years, and you have 1,000 people in the wetland, you need to reclaim that wetland. It's a fact. How do you do it? You cannot wake up, beat people, and throw them away. You have to say, okay, this was a mistake. We allowed these people to congregate one by one. Now the whole village is in the wetland. Provide alternative way where they are going. Other, you are going to create a confrontation. You are preserving this environment for the people. You must make sure that the people for whom you are working agree with you and participate. And the bottom line is what we started with. Teach them. Why are you killing the environment? Because you are actually, your life depends on this environment. You destroy it, you are destroying yourself. If you are not the person, yes, you will die. But your children and your grandchildren will suffer the consequences. Educate them. After that, provide alternative way of life. As long as people don't have alternative way, the pressure on the environment will continue, the confrontation between the communities and the government will continue, and this enforcement will become, I don't know how to say it, because when the tension is too much, then other forces will come to say reduce on the pressure. Yes, don't kill the people, don't destroy their property. They came here when you were here. Can we compensate them? Where is the money to compensate them? So this balancing of correcting a problem that has existed over time is corrective. And that's why I want to appeal to every Ugandan, my sisters from the civil society organization, our development partners, and good enough. They have understood this, and we're working together. We have programs to resettle people, to provide the alternative incomes, to provide the alternative livelihood for those who are in the wetlands, but also to try to design agricultural activities that are not contradictory 100%. Can people do fish farming in a swamp in an organized way without destroying don't plant a eucalyptus tree in the swamp. That is too much. But there are other things that can be done at the banks. So that is the process where we are, but it takes a lot of time to explain. And as I end, over time, Ugandans also have tried it. Maybe with this democratization now, they are right. Rights everywhere. I have the right to stay here. My grandfather stayed here. This is this. So you need to work together, not only government, private sector, social organization, the churches, all leaders, to make sure that we are all moving together. We are speaking the same, because all of us need this environment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We're talking about integration, and I liked your comment on the NDP3. The document is good. Your prayer is our prayer, that it will be implemented. Mandates, we are talked of earlier, don't step on my mandate. Even the budget we are going to be running was still appropriated in sectors, and yet it's supposed to be implemented in program approach. This is NDP3 already in its second year, yet to be started on under the program approach. This is the prayer we're trying to look forward to. We join you in that prayer, and even as churches are closed, thank God the President said God is everywhere. Mechanization, what language do we give out? President's nation address. He talked of somebody who has 18,000 cows on 250 acres. In Uganda, people just say, now that my cows have increased, whose land do I grab? How do you mechanize and go deeper and intense? These integrated approaches, I want to believe Helen lives in them. You're talking about integrated community initiatives. What message do you have for us on managing the integration of initiatives from where you see it. You do it every day with the communities, with government, with yourselves, with development partners. What message do you have for us as we wind up this segment?
In terms of integration, they've talked about policies, they are well in place, the plans are in place, the budgeting is there, aligning. We need to align. I'll take, for instance, I'll talk about the issue of urbanization. If you look at urbanization as it's happening right now, that within this country, the rate of urbanization outstrips the growth of agriculture sector as it is. So as the people of Uganda, we need to make sure that we plan ahead of development. What the Undersecretary is talking about, sometimes we have these issues when the plans come after the people have settled in. For instance, if we are going to make sure that we have sustainable land use, then we must have land use plans. We have emerging cities that are coming everywhere, okay? Do we have physical plans that are gazetted? Do we have land use plans that are in place? So that people can know from the word go that, you know what, this is a gazetted market. It will even help in terms of investments and land acquisition challenges that we have. So let's match the policies, the plans, and make sure that we have the budgets there. Then also in terms of integration, let's not forget about the private sector. Honorable talked about people from the private sector. Private sector people are business oriented, okay? It must make business sense for them to be able to partner with us in ensuring that we have agriculture that is greener, agriculture that is resilient. So we must produce data that speaks to them. We've talked about inadequacies in data. If you talk about climate change, there are climate risks that a business person would like to know in terms of predictability. So if you're talking about integration, we must try as much as possible to meet the needs of the specific stakeholders that we have, the private sector, the civil society, the farmers, the community at large. And for us to be able to meet the needs of these people in terms of integration, we must have data that speaks to these people, okay? We must have curricula, for instance, that is relevant. Talk about the young people. How do we get them on board in terms of value addition, in terms of, you know, providing job opportunities as a sector? So we must be able to integrate and bring everyone on board to make sure that agriculture works for us.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that addition. A friend of mine's child goes to some kindergarten, and they were really making the education that speaks to their space as children. So their teacher told them, Mr. Subtraction is a very bad man. He takes away. Mr. Addition is a very good lady. I don't know why they call that one a lady and the other one a man. She adds on. This has been a value-adding conversation. And thank God the panel had more ladies than men. This is not to say Mr. Segawa and me have been subtracting. Whatever they added, we were the ones we want to believe who brought it, but by subtracting it somewhere. I want to appreciate my panel, Honorable Victoria Sectoleko. Thank you very, very much for your insights from history and the passion. I appreciate the passion. It has helped people benefit from passion fruits and many other crops. I want to appreciate Segawa. Thank you very much. We were in the trenches of economics together with him many years back. So like I talked to Adam Muguma, I could talk to Segawa, the same economics still applies. Helen, thank you so much. Civil society is my home because they really help to bring the voices of the voiceless. It's not every time that you have a clip that brings the voices of the people, but this part in that business of making sure they talk. And Dr. Sistema University, greetings to the university out there. We want to appreciate your input. It was very, very handy. I want to get back to the presenters to give us some winding up remarks. I want to reach out to Kunda. I hope Kunda is still with us. We've been talking in your space. You gave us a very good, insightful presentation. If you can find Kunda, please. She has some 2 minutes to give us some kind of wrap-up of what has she picked. What is the key takeaway that we shouldn't miss from wherever she is? Kunda, please, if you can find her for me.
Thank you very much, Fred, and also to the panelists for a very informative and insightful discussion on this. I think if there are any key takeaway messages, particularly from the report and the special topic in particular, the first one is that we cannot continue to do business as usual. The country really needs to make a fundamental shift in terms of the way that we look at land and natural resource management, how that is managed and utilized, given that we have these changing events in terms of increasing needs in food security. When you look at economic growth, you look at poverty reduction, and all of this has to be done in a changing climate. So that is the first key message. The second key message is that sustainable land management, as well as climate smart agriculture, are ways that we can actually achieve some of these fundamental outcomes that we would like to see. But then the issues obviously are that they're not at the levels that we would want to have them at. They're still low. We need to increase the adoption of these technologies in a way that will support the kind of transformation that the country is aspiring to. And then how do we do that? Again, it comes back to the key strategies that the report kind of zooms in on. And this is looking at increasing budgetary support. It's looking at improving or increasing incentives that we talked about in terms of adoption of these technologies. We need to increase access to data, to knowledge. I like the fact that during the presentation, there was also this focus on taking a very cross-sectoral approach to the issues around climate change. So stakeholder engagement is very, very critical in terms of also harmonizing the policies, but also looking at improving the behavioral change, particularly at the community level. The change in mindset is going to be quite critical as well. Then there are issues of promoting location-specific technologies that we talked about that are complementary, that enable those multiple objectives that we discussed. And then lastly, streamlining those policies. I think the harmonization at the institutional level is very, very critical if we're going to achieve this green, resilient development trajectory that we want the country to go on. So that is it from my end. Thank you once again, and back to you, Fred.
Insights, it can't be business as usual. I know we have a land ownership policy. We possibly need a land use policy where you own the land. But how do you use it should not just be left to you. And this week I visited the swamp just 22 kilometers out of here, and I saw this dichotomy. On one side, somebody had planted eucalyptus in the swamp. There was nobody working there. Just next to this person was another one who was doing fish farming. I counted over 50 employees. Not only is she doing it the climate smart way, she's also employing people and giving us fish exports, giving us nutrition, quite a lot. What should we do differently? What did I learn from my mother? Rachel shares a name with my mother, so I call her my mom. Wherever I find those who have that name. And I've been in good comfort with Rachel, and I know there was a presentation you made. You may want to speak to what has come out of this going forward as you go back to begin drafting the 18th economic update. How do you want us to handle the 17th? We want to appreciate your insights as we go forward. Anything you want to say as we close off?
Yeah, thank you very much, Fred, and thank you very much to all the panelists and everyone who has been listening in and providing comments and views. I think the discussion has pointed to some of the key issues that we need to implement at the grassroots, because every time we choose a special topic, over the last 5 or 6 years, it is not because it is, something you want to write about. It is because it's a pertinent issue that needs to be looked at. So how do we pick those measures or lessons that we're getting from these special topics, this time around sustainable land management and being able to undertake practices that can help the farmer, myself, everyone else to avoid the climate shocks that we talked about. But coming back at the macro level, at the people who are managing our resources, meager as they are, I think there was a question about priorities. And that pushes me back to a discussion of fiscal management. If we are going to have or even sustain growth and ensure a recovery and recovering and coming back better, as was mentioned, I think this provided an opportunity to look at how do we manage our fiscal policy today. Among all the things that we said at the macro level, because if you have a crisis, it is an opportunity. But what has the budget done? We look again at the old way of looking at a budget. You add a little bit to what you used to do before. We have not reprioritized the budget. When I look at, for example, last year, when we had a crisis, of course, we got new pressures, some of them self-inflicted, because every meals of injection, then the adjustment is going to be even tougher. So how do we stop this process of creating more pain for ourselves, for managing our resources? When I was coming back to the example last year, when the shock came in place, the pandemic, there was a quick discussion of what do we do, what are the priorities. I think additional pressures came on the budget. Many of these pressures got funding, but one of the most important priorities for making sure that livelihoods remain or are impacted least, even up to today, has not gotten funding. And that is the social safety net that I talked about before. So how do we even recover and keep talking about recovery when we don't care for some of the priorities that are coming on board? So I want to go back to the issue of reprioritization as we are moving forward. When we talk about these issues, it's not that we just want to talk about them and leave them to the ground, but we have to go back into the budget and see how do we make agriculture better. What kind of resources can we give within the budget, limited as it is? Instead of adding more pressures, we look at the little we have and reprioritize. We haven't reprioritized. We've added more pressures, and we've left out unfunded priorities that need to be addressed like yesterday. So at the macro level, I think that would be the most important aspect of macroeconomic management that we have to undertake. Then secondly, and this will be secondly, as I said, is the coordination with monetary policy. The monetary authorities, as Dr. Mugume has said, have done all they can to ensure that there is liquidity for the private sector, liquidity for the firms that are getting out of hand. But at the same time, when you give funds to the banking system, you know that you are going to give a big manufacturer. So we have to think through, how do we get to the small people who are working and are trying to survive, but have not gotten support, have not gotten additional resources because they can't even access the banking system. And probably there is a bit more coming once these support mechanisms are taken away. So we have to think through how are we going to be managing that upcoming challenge. It is coming. Because once you remove the support that has been given to a farm, you know that something is coming. Then we'll come to the longer term issues. First priority, if I'm going to adjust the budget, is to make sure that those safety nets are there. So so that whatever I do on the growth side, I'm sure it will spill through to the rest of the economy. And then, of course, education. We've talked a lot about education and how important it is. But for me, the most critical issue is how to transition from the current. It is a crisis. It is a crisis for this country, well, for all countries, because kids are not going to school, and that's the human capital. Human capital is the most important resource for growth, for sustainability. But how do we think through the process and get back to a normal human capital building process? So I'll stop there, because the other issues of productivity have been really, really discussed deeply. And I just want to thank everyone and everybody who has been contributing, who has participated. It has been really a good discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rachel and Kunda. And the Lido has an entire team at the World Bank that put together. And for the topics that you select, I've been reading this, and one of it was about human capital development. There was one on revenues. And I think we need to get back to a policy conversation on some of these things, because people will say, well, I am not yet there, my debt to GDP is not yet there. But the other pain, as you raised, a lot of revenue is going into debt service at this point. And that comes with the shortage on provision of basic services, including the safety nets. So these things are integrated. We can't look here and only look there. I know the vaccines are running out. Now, what is our way forward? We've been hearing that next week, no more vaccines. People responded. Now, how do you manage that response? People want to vaccinate, they are not there. If the man has gone into debt, what should we do differently? The word fiscal is not physical. So policy does not have to be physical fights. It's fiscal, F-I. How do we make it logical? Well, this report is coming your way, but before it does so, we need to launch it. We need to have it launched so that you too can benefit from the deeper reading. You can get that highlighter. It is also now electronically available. We used to only think highlighting was only for hard copies. Thanks to the technology, you can highlight virtually on your own tablet, on your own whichever other gadget you're going to read. We are going into the launch of the report, and we're going to, people shorten the name to Tony. I said it was Anthony, but if your people call you Tony, I will have laughed at that as well. Thank you very much, and we want to get back to your team for the launch of the report. Thank you. And thank you, viewers and listeners, everybody who has been with us. This is a conversation that we need to continue. It is a crisis, but we don't want to let a good crisis go away. How do we benefit from it? We're into the launch of the report.
Good. Well, thank you, everybody, for staying with us. It's been great to have you join us today. I very much appreciate you being part of the conversation. This economic update for us is our contribution to informing the conversation, informing the policy debate in Uganda. So we're very grateful that you're listening, and we hope that very much this can inform the discussion and the decisions that people are taking, both in government and in society more broadly. A very special thanks to all of our participants today, to our moderators and to our panelists. Thank you very much for giving us a very rich conversation, discussion of the issues, and putting lots of great ideas on the table. And a very special thanks both to Rachel and to Kunda and for their teams for all the hard work they did in putting the report together. I think probably the most common word I've heard today is crisis. Uganda is facing a crisis of huge magnitude, like many other countries in the world. And we hope that through our analysis, our diagnostics, and the ideas that we're putting on the table, that we can contribute to helping you as Ugandans and as Uganda come through this crisis, manage this crisis better, and build better for the future, a more resilient future where all Ugandans can benefit from economic growth. So as our moderator said, the report is now available online. Our 17th Uganda Economic Update, Building for Resilience and Growth. We'll be putting the link on our social media accounts and communicating them in other ways. I hope that we've whetted your appetite and that you'll be keen to go to the report to get the full analysis and the full details and the full set of recommendations moving forward. So thank you all very much. I hereby launch the report. And again, thank you all for joining us today, and looking forward to carrying on the conversation with you over the next weeks and months. Thank you and goodbye.